Hey guys, I'm Hannah Cox with Ace Politics, back with my show, COPAGANDA. Each week, we're looking at police video footage and examining the ways they break the law and get away with it. This week, we're going back to a 2020 case of a man named Duncan Lemp. In March of 2020, police carried out a raid on Duncan Lemp's home where he was murdered, but given the other events going on that month, there was quite a bit in the news, this event kind of flew under the radar. But the circumstances of Duncan Lemp's murder were actually quite similar to another case that did captivate the nation, Breonna Taylor. Like Breonna Taylor, Duncan's raid was carried out by a SWAT team in the middle of the night with a no-knock warrant. This took place in Maryland, where Duncan was sleeping next to his pregnant girlfriend at the time. Now, the SWAT team members who initially carried out the raid were not wearing body camera footage at the time of the event. And that means we have a case of he said, she said, because the only actual witnesses to this murder were Duncan's pregnant girlfriend, who were sleeping in the bed next to him, and the police who were on scene. And I think, given the way these events unfolded, we can kind of determine who had more of a case to lie here. After Duncan was murdered, another police officer did come into the house and basically obtain some footage of the crime scene to document the details, and I think basically to try to get something to back them up for their behavior that night. Police began surveilling Duncan for months before they carried out this raid on his home, after they received a confidential tip that he owned an illegal gun. Now, there's multiple problems here. One, where's the proof that they actually received any such tip whatsoever? We don't have it. Secondarily, even if they did receive a tip saying that he had an illegal gun, that's not really proof that a crime has been committed. Anybody could call the police and report anything they wanted about somebody else, which is why we have we're supposed to have a strenuous set of rules that the court and the justice system have to follow in order to bring charges against somebody. When police merely act on tips, you end up in circumstances where people get swatted, which is something that actually happens a good bit, where you have people call and report violence or call and report crimes or call and report suspicious activity about another person where there's no evidence of that. And they do it because they want the person to get what's called swatted, where police show up, raid their homes, maybe even shoot up the premises. This is a federal crime, but that doesn't actually prevent it from happening. It's a really scary thing that we need better protections against in our system. But let's say Duncan did have an illegal gun. Again, there's never been any proof of that. But wouldn't a basic search warrant obtained through normal protocols carried out in the middle of the day and not endangering people's lives have sufficed in that circumstance? I would think so. No matter what, the excuses police have continued to offer for Duncan's death that night do not justify the actions that they took in the first place. And it's important to remember that this exact same excuse has been used by various federal agencies and police to murder countless other Americans, most notably in events like Ruby Ridge, Waco, the list goes on. I do think it's really interesting that we recently saw Hunter Biden be charged with having a legal gun, and yet he didn't get no-knock raided or swatted in the middle of the night. But as I mentioned, police have never been able to provide any evidence of their excuses for killing Duncan, and they have continued to fight the release of information in this case altogether. Now, before the crime, they say Lemp posted photos of himself on Instagram with various firearms, which is not a crime, and police concluded that one of the guns was an IWI Taver X95 rifle, an assault weapon that the report notes is prohibited in Maryland. However, as the official report later mentions, it should be noted that upon further review and investigation, it was determined that it was not an assault rifle. The report asserts that Lemp's rifle was an actual legal copycat made to look like the illegal version of the IWI Taver X95. So that piece of evidence the cops had was bogus. Police also tried to say they had evidence that Duncan bought a gun illegally because he had a juvenile record, which is of course sealed, but I don't think there's any indication he was ever a violent person. But if you have a juvenile record, they say you're not supposed to be able to buy a gun until you're 30. Duncan was 21 years old. However, Maryland has some of the nation's most onerous requirements for buying guns, and Lemp purchased at least one of his firearms legally from a licensed dealer in Rockville, Maryland. So if it was true that he was ineligible to purchase guns at his age, the background system would certainly have caught that, and he wouldn't have been able to legally purchase a gun in Maryland. So their evidence falls apart yet again. Lastly, police also tried to claim they thought Duncan might be making and selling ghost guns, but again, they have no evidence of that. And this is just a reminder that they can literally murder you and then say whatever they want about you after the fact. And as long as it has some sort of a political bias towards it, half the country is going to excuse their actions. This is just one of many ways that anti-gun laws end up getting innocent people killed while doing virtually nothing to reduce actual violence. Even if Duncan had this gun, it appears it is only illegal in Maryland. It's an arbitrary restriction. It's no different than any other gun, and it shouldn't be used as an excuse for police to murder Americans in their home. These kinds of laws do infringe on the right to self-defense, and they should be overturned immediately. You should also know that Maryland has a long record of SWAT debacles. After police wrongfully raided a mayor's house and killed his dogs in 2008, which you might remember from another episode of COPAGANDA, they do quite a bit, Maryland required police to report every SWAT raid. Between 2010 and 2014, side note, it's just really funny they didn't require them to report every SWAT raid before 2010. Between 2010 and 2014, police in Maryland conducted more than 8,000 raids. 8,000 SWAT raids. Do you really think all of those were necessary? I don't. They killed 9 people and injured almost 100 civilians in the process. Despite controversy, statistics were no longer collected after 2014 because they were so damning, and strong police unions have blocked numerous efforts at legislative reform to make them report more. This is, again, something that you need to be aware of. There is virtually no national system for police to track all kinds of data. There's no requirement for them to do so. They frequently do not. We don't even have a good consensus on the practices of many police departments because of this, and their police unions do work strenuously to block any and all kinds of criminal justice reform, specifically the kinds that would place more accountability and transparency around the system of policing in the first place. And you should know that when police unions are lobbying in that capacity, they're doing so on your tax dollar. This is what we call taxpayer-funded lobbying, where you have people and their unions who work for the government, who are paid by your hard-earned taxes, then take the money they're being paid with and turn around and use it to go and sit at state capitals and at the federal capitol and lobby against you and your rights. This is why I think both taxpayer-funded lobbying and public sector unions should be absolutely banned. It is a complete perversion of our democratic processes. Let's get back to the story, though. According to USA Today, Lemp lived with his parents in a sedate neighborhood in Potomac, Maryland. According to the county report, a no-knock raid was justified due to Lemp being anti-government, anti-police, currently in possession of body armor, and an active member of the Three Percenters, which they said was a far-right paramilitary group that discussed government resistance. Now, the interesting thing I think here is that they will label absolutely anybody who is anti-government as far-right. If you dislike police, if you question the government, if you exercise your Second Amendment rights, you can be called far right after they murder you. And again, a lot of people will not even question that narrative. To be clear, at least half the country could be put into these buckets of being pro-Second Amendment, anti-government, having issues with police. People on both the left and right could justifiably be categorized by those labels. All of those positions, by the way, highly acceptable. People should be questioning police. There is a lot of corruption. People should be anti-government. It's one of the most inhumane forces in existence. We need a very limited government to protect ourselves against its corruption. And exercising your Second Amendment, your right to self-defense, is a basic God-given right. These should never be things that can be used for the state to come in and kill you over. As USA Today went on to point out, belonging to a group is not illegal. So even if he was a part of this group and they did have anti-government views, that is his constitutional right. Also notably, for an anti-government group, this group also really seemed to be very active in shouting down things like white supremacy. According to USA Today, again, the group actually spoke out against actions by white supremacists during the 2017 deadly riots in Charlottesville, Virginia, and they were also known to show up at protests to push back against efforts going down there by Black Lives Matter. But the way they phrase this, it makes it sound as if they were there to protest Black Lives Matter. Other evidence actually shows that their efforts were focused on saving the lives of people caught in confrontations with police at those rallies. Lemp's views on gun ownership and tyranny seem to drive a lot of his activism, and text messages that were released between he and his mother showed that he did fear for the government coming after him as a result. One of his last tweets before he was killed declared, "The Constitution is dead," and a mere 2 months later, police killed him. At about 4:30 a.m., members of the raid team did what's called a break and rake on Lemp's first floor bedroom window. They were standing outside his house, and one officer used what's called a fireman's pick tool to break the bedroom window closest to the bed where Lemp and his pregnant girlfriend Casey Robinson were sleeping. The tool also has a hook that is then used to grab a hold of and pull away the blinds so the officer would have an unobstructed view inside the bedroom. Once the window was broken and the shades were pulled out of the way, one officer ducked below the window line as he was actually unarmed, and a second officer, who was the shooting officer, officer was armed with a rifle and stepped up to the window looking inside to locate Lemp as soon as he possibly could to prevent him from being able to have any ability to access weapons that could be used against them. Another team of SWAT cops at the same time used a battering ram to smash in the front door of the Lemp house. Lemp was killed by 5 shots from a policeman shooting through his bedroom window, and they say all 5 shots hit his body. So this officer was at an extremely close range. That's very difficult to do otherwise. Now, the footage obtained after the shooting did show that Lemp had several guns in his room, and according to both the girlfriend and the SWAT officer, he did make a motion for his gun to defend himself, which is completely justifiable in this circumstance. Can you fathom being asleep in the middle of the night? It's 4:30 a.m. You have your pregnant girlfriend next to you and people start busting down your front door, breaking in your window. Are you thinking, maybe this is some deranged police officers with nothing better to do and I should comply? No, you're waking up, you're startled, you're scared, you're jumping into action, and like any normal person would do, he grabbed his gun to defend himself and his girlfriend and his unborn child. That is not a crime. Killing somebody in that circumstance is. This is why no-knock raids needlessly put everybody involved in harm. There is no excuse for them. These violate private property rights. They subvert the Second Amendment. I think they are a complete perversion of our justice system and the due process that people are supposed to be afforded under our Constitution. The report goes on to note that at the same time the bedroom window was being smashed in, other members of the SWAT team were tasked with deploying flashbangs outside the residence to disorient the senses of the occupants of the house as to what was happening. So he was even further disoriented by the presence of these, which the Supreme Court of North Carolina later labeled as a weapon of mass death and destruction. A criminal defense lawyer, Clay Conrad, commented on flashbangs and said they are just an assault. These things are designed to blind and deafen. You're intentionally injuring people. So not only were they breaking into his home with guns, they were also deploying these things in the middle of the night. Again, I want to know who in their right mind would respond in any other way other than what Duncan did. Remind yourself that they admittedly did all of this based off of a tip that this guy owned one illegal gun. How in any way does that make sense? Now, you might be asking yourself, why on earth were these SWAT team members not wearing body cameras? Which is an excellent question to ask that unfortunately has a very annoying answer. Montgomery County actually allowed SWAT to opt out of the truth and transparency of body cameras by not being required to wear them before this raid. The video we do have was actually taken about 7 minutes after the murder. Police refused to release any of this for almost a year afterwards, and it took a lot of external forces and pressure even to get that. After the shooting, media and government accountability organizations made formal requests to Montgomery County for the body camera footage. Police officials declined to release the footage and to describe how extensive or limited the recordings were. Leading the push for the video's release was Judicial Watch, a conservative group known for filing Freedom of Information Act requests to federal agencies. The group requested the Montgomery County Police video, it stated, as part of its mission to tell the public what their government is up to. Montgomery officials denied the initial request from Judicial Watch, the Washington Post, and other organizations, saying that doing so could interfere with the ongoing investigation, that I'm confident they were not investigating themselves on these matters. Yeah, right. This was a cover-up. Judicial Watch then did sue the county, by the way. And I think it's really interesting that you see both a right-wing group and a left-wing group like the Washington Post filing for information, suing the government, trying to get these records. This is something that should be bipartisan. Everyone should agree that these kinds of actions are completely unconstitutional and that there should be transparency and accountability around them. Montgomery County Police Chief Marcus Jones said after the murder that the department would change its regulations to require all SWAT officers to wear body cameras moving forward. But unfortunately, that's about the only accountability we get in this entire scenario. Unsurprisingly, if you follow these kinds of cases, the shooting of Lemp was ruled justified by prosecutors according to a 17-page report they released later on. The officer who shot Lemp did so, prosecutors concluded, after Lemp ignored commands to raise his hands as he got out of his bed, grabbed an assault-style rifle and pointed it at the officer, according to the officer. Lemp's family members have long held that the police exaggerated the threat he posed. His family said police obtained a no-knock warrant based on flimsy evidence, opened fire on him while he was asleep, and then burst into his room and stomped on his neck. Assertions contradicted by the report, but attorneys for Lemp's family and his girlfriend have pushed back against the findings in the report. A grand jury did examine the evidence that was presented to them later on, but all the testimony and evidence that they got remains confidential, except for snippets that the county attorney's office received permission from a judge to disclose in the report that exonerated police. So this is the big problem with grand juries. One, they are very, very secretive proceedings. Two, the people who sit on them often are not provided full evidence of what actually went down, and we have no way of knowing what they saw, what they didn't. Three, we often see prosecutors work alongside police to protect them. They work arm in arm. Prosecutors are basically an extension of police offices. They work to press charges against their crimes. Police work to gather evidence for their trials. These people know each other intimately, and it's one reason we often do not see prosecutions against police go anywhere, because they go before a grand jury. The prosecutor can absolutely throw the case. The defense can basically work to get most of the evidence thrown out altogether, and then they'll come forward and be like, well, the grand jury didn't think there was any reason to move forward with charges. And most people will go, yeah, then the police officer must be innocent. No, the grand jury system must be corrupt. That's what. Lemp's mother, Mercedes Lemp, commented after the murder and said, "I will always wonder whether the police intended to kill Duncan from the start. There was never a search, never any regard for our family. The way they conducted themselves seems as if they intended to kill him even before the raid began." Having surveyed Lemp and knowing his political views, his reaction at 4:42 a.m. was as predictable as the sun rising in the east. Yeah. If you know somebody is afraid for their lives, if you know somebody is a little bit paranoid, if you know that they are a believer in the Second Amendment and you carry out a no-knock raid, you can be absolutely certain that they're going to fire back. Not because they want to kill police, but because you were raiding their home in the middle of the night and they're going to think they are in danger, which, you know what? They are. And his mother is absolutely right in pointing out that not only did they show no regard for Duncan's life, they showed no regard for his girlfriend or his unborn child's life in carrying out this raid. It was completely unnecessary from the very beginning. This is a really sad case, and it should be scary to absolutely anybody that if you question police, if you push back on the government, if you exercise your Second Amendment, you too can be made into a villain by these people, and nothing will happen to them as a result. Just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get you, and unfortunately in Duncan's case, his suspicions were absolutely correct. All right, guys, that's a wrap for this week. Be sure to leave us a comment, subscribe to the channel, and until next week, stay based.